A billionaire's daughter on the edge of a building, a construction worker with nothing to lose, two lives collide in a single moment, forcing them both to confront their pasts, fight for their futures, and navigate the tangled web of power, betrayal, and survival. Will saving her from the balcony be enough to heal the wounds they both carry? Before we dive into this unforgettable tale, make sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Luxury Tales by SK family. Subscribe now, and let's begin this incredible journey together. Adana Chukwuma stood barefoot, her silk robe fluttering in the warm evening breeze. Down below, the city pulsed with life. Okadas weaving between impatient cars, hawkers calling out their wares, music spilling from roadside bars, but none of it reached her. To the world, Adana was the untouchable daughter of the late billionaire industrialist Chief Obinna Chukwuma, the man who had transformed a small steel trading company into a multinational empire. But in the last 6 months, that empire had begun to crumble, piece by piece, headline by headline. The culprit was someone she once trusted like blood, Uncle Tayo, her father's oldest friend and business partner. He had stolen billions through quiet embezzlement, then leaked doctored documents to the press, making it look like Adana herself had mismanaged funds. Within weeks, her name was dragged through every gossip blog and primetime news segment. Shareholders whispered about her incompetence. Former allies stopped returning her calls. 2 nights ago, the final blow landed. Her fiancé, Adewale, heir to an influential political family, ended their engagement. His parting words still rang in her ears, "I can't be tied to a sinking ship." Now, the shame felt like an iron weight pressing her chest. Her father's legacy was slipping through her fingers, and she had no strength left to fight. Her gaze drifted toward the edge of the balcony. The city lights below blurred. A voice in her head whispered that all the noise, the humiliation, the loneliness could end in one step forward. That's when fate decided to intervene, in the most unlikely way. The wind picked up at that height, whipping Adana's robe against her legs. The balcony rail felt cold under her palms. She leaned forward slightly, her breath shallow, the smell of the sea mingling with the faint diesel fumes from the streets below. Her mind had gone quiet, not the peace of relief, but the eerie stillness before a storm breaks. One step, just one step, and it's over. She shut her eyes, and for a moment she imagined her father's voice calling her Adam, his favorite name for her, but the sound was distant, fading. Then something odd happened. A loud crack split the air, sharp enough to make her eyes fly open. At first she thought it was her mind playing tricks, until the balcony floor beneath her feet trembled. The railing groaned, tilting outward slightly. Her stomach dropped. What? The building was brand new, a luxury tower meant to scream perfection. But tonight, the concrete under the balcony's steel frame decided to betray its glamour. The sound came again, this time like a bone snapping. Her body jolted backward on instinct just as the far end of the railing broke free, dangling dangerously toward the street. And that's when she saw him. Across the narrow service alley, on the scaffolding of the unfinished building next door, a young man in a dusty construction vest froze mid-step. He had been carrying a sack of cement on his shoulder when the sudden noise caught his attention. Their eyes met for a split second, hers wide with shock, his with alarm. Without hesitation, he dropped the sack, leaped across 2 planks, and climbed down to a lower ledge that aligned with her balcony. "Madam, hold on!" he shouted in a rich Igbo accent, his voice cutting through the traffic noise. Adana stumbled backward, but her heel caught the torn metal edge of the balcony floor. She slipped, arms flailing. Before she could scream, a rough, calloused hand gripped her forearm like a vice. The man's muscles strained as he pulled her toward the adjoining ledge. She could smell cement dust on his shirt, feel the tremor of effort in his grip. "I've got you, just don't fight me," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Adana's heart hammered. She wasn't sure if she wanted to be saved, but instinct overpowered despair. She clung to him until he managed to guide her onto the scaffolding. When they were both steady, he let go, breathing hard. You could have died," he said, studying her face as if memorizing it. "What were you doing out there?" She said nothing. Her lips trembled, her eyes darting away. Down below, horns blared and the city roared on, oblivious. Adana didn't know it yet, but this nameless construction worker, dusted in cement with no reason to care, had just altered the course of her life. And as for him, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something strange about the way she had been standing there, staring into the abyss, as if the broken balcony wasn't an accident, but an interruption. The scaffolding swayed gently in the night wind, a reminder that their perch was far from safe. Adana gripped one of the wooden planks, her knuckles pale, as she tried to steady her breath. The man stepped back just enough to give her space, though his eyes never left her. "You're shaking," he said. His voice wasn't judgmental, just observant. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. I slipped," she muttered, the lie tasting bitter even as she said it. The man didn't look convinced. "Slipped? People don't stand that close to the edge just to enjoy the view, madam." Her gaze flicked away, scanning the half-built floors of the skeletal structure they stood on. A few workers moved in the shadows below, carrying buckets of sand. None of them seemed to notice her. For a strange moment, she felt invisible, as though she had stepped out of her real life into some parallel place where the name Adana Chukwuma carried no weight. The man wiped his dusty hands on his jeans. "Name's Chike," he said, breaking the silence. "You?" She hesitated. If she told him her name, he would know exactly who she was. The disgraced billionaire's daughter. The girl whose face had been plastered across gossip blogs for months, but something in his expression, an absence of recognition, tempted her. "Anna," she said finally, shortening her real name. Chike nodded. "Anna, you need to be careful. This balcony," he jerked his head toward the leaning railing, "was not fixed well. Poor construction. I've been telling my Oga that the new buildings around here are using cheap cement and shortcuts. Tonight it nearly killed you." The irony hit her like a slap. If the builders had done their job perfectly, the railing would have held, and she might have gone through with her plan. Instead, the same poor craftsmanship she would normally have condemned had forced her to cling to life. Before she could reply, a sharp voice rang out from below. "Cheek, what did you do for that side? Come down now." It was one of the site supervisors. Cheeky ignored him, his focus still on her. "I need to get you inside before someone sees you out here. You're not dressed for a construction site." Reluctantly, she let him guide her across the narrow planks toward a safer section of the building. Her bare feet stung against the rough wood, but she kept her chin up. When they reached a dimly lit stairwell, Chike stopped. "You live here?" he asked, pointing toward Amati Towers. She nodded. "Yes, top floor." "You're lucky," he said, almost under his breath. "People like me spend our whole lives looking up at places like that." His words carried no bitterness, only a quiet truth. It made her uneasy. She wanted to say something, thank him maybe, but a part of her feared that gratitude would make her feel even more indebted. Instead, she murmured, "I should go." Chike stepped aside, but his gaze lingered on her as she crossed into the lobby of Amati Towers. Behind her, the hum of the city grew louder again, like the world reclaiming her. What she didn't see was the small group of residents near the entrance, whispering and pointing in her direction. One of them already had their phone out, the camera discreetly following her. By morning, the incident wouldn't be their little secret anymore. By morning, Lagos was already buzzing, not just with traffic and the usual market noise, but with her name. Adana had barely touched her breakfast when her phone started vibrating uncontrollably on the glass dining table. First came a call from an unknown number, then another, then a flurry of WhatsApp messages, some from old acquaintances she hadn't heard from in years. Against her better judgment, she opened Instagram. It was worse than she feared. The top trending topic was #Billionaire balcony drama. A grainy, shaky video, clearly recorded from the entrance of Amati Towers, showed her in her silk robe being pulled across a plank by a construction worker. The clip was short, less than 15 seconds, but it was enough. The comment section was a battlefield. Some mocked her, some speculated about her mysterious night out, and others spun conspiracy theories that she had staged the scene for attention. Her hands trembled as she scrolled. Every insult cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Drama queen Heiress can't live without headlines. See as she disgrace her papa name, That man deserves hazard pay for touching her. She slammed the phone down, breathing hard. The humiliation from the past months had found a new chapter, this time with moving pictures. Just then her housekeeper, Mama Sade, peeked into the room. "Madam, there's someone downstairs. He says his name is Chiki. Should I tell him to go?" For a second, she froze. Part of her wanted to slam the door on this whole situation, but another part, the part still feeling the rough warmth of his hand gripping her arm, the steadiness in his eyes, told her to hear him out. "Send him up," she said quietly. Minutes later, Chike stepped into her apartment, looking out of place among the glass furniture and abstract art. He was freshly showered, but still in worn jeans and a faded T-shirt. His gaze swept the room quickly before settling on her. "You saw the video?" he asked. She gave a bitter laugh. "Everyone has seen the video." He shifted on his feet. "I'm sorry, Anna. I didn't know someone was recording. I only wanted to make sure you were safe." Her eyes flicked up to his. "You saved me, Chiki, but you also put me back in the spotlight I was trying to escape." For a long moment, silence hung between them. The city noise below seemed distant. Then, in a voice softer than she expected, he said, "What were you doing on that balcony last night? And please, no lies this time." The question landed like a weight. She could have deflected. She could have invented another excuse. But something about the way he asked, not demanding, not accusing, just seeing her, cracked the wall she had built around herself. Her voice trembled. "Because everything I've ever known is gone. My father's company, my name, my fiancé, even my friends. I thought, if I ended it, at least no one else could take anything from me." For the first time, Chike's eyes softened. He stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "Maybe," he said slowly, "life just gave you a second chance without you asking. Don't waste it." The words hit her harder than she expected, not because they were profound, but because they were the first she'd heard in months that didn't come wrapped in judgment or pity. And in that moment she realized she wasn't sure whether she wanted him to walk away or stay. The following week should have been quiet, but Lagos never slept, and neither did its gossip mill. If the viral balcony video had been the spark, the tabloids were the gasoline. New headlines erupted. Heiress rescued by common laborer love story or pity case. Sources claim Chukwuma legacy in talks for liquidation. Uncle Tayo responds, she needs help, not control of a company. Adana sat in her living room with the curtains drawn, her laptop open to a news article dissecting every frame of the rescue video. They had frozen the moment Chike pulled her onto the scaffolding, zoomed in on his hand gripping her arm, and added captions like it was a romantic drama. The truth, that she had been seconds away from ending her life, was buried under a layer of sensational nonsense. Then her email pinged. It was from the Chukwuma family lawyer. Board meeting scheduled for Thursday. Agenda: emergency vote on leadership restructuring. Recommendation: transfer control of Chukwuma Holdings to interim management, headed by Mr. Tayo. Her pulse quickened. This was it. The man who had stolen everything was about to make it official. Once the vote passed, her father's empire would be out of her hands forever. She slammed the laptop shut, pressing her palms to her face. The shame from the video, the whispers about her mental state, the constant judgment, they weren't just humiliations anymore. They were weapons in Tayo's hands. A knock at the door jolted her. When she opened it, Chike stood there, a manila envelope tucked under his arm. "I didn't know if I should come," he said, "but I think this is important." She stepped aside and he entered, glancing at the dim room. "You look like you haven't slept," he murmured. "What's in the envelope?" she asked. He placed it on the table and slid out a set of photographs. They were taken at night. Stacks of cement bags with faded manufacturing dates, rusted rebar hidden beneath fresh paint, workers hauling debris into skips. "I told you that balcony nearly killed you because of poor construction," he said. "This is proof. Your building is cutting corners. Same company builds most of the high-end towers your father's company rents out. If this comes out, it could expose Tayo." Her breath caught. "How did you get these?" Chike gave a faint smile. "Let's just say I'm invisible in places you can't enter. People talk to workers when they don't know they're being listened to. For the first time in weeks, Adana felt something other than despair, a flicker of strategy. This evidence could damage Tayo's credibility before the board vote. But there was risk. If the media spun it wrong, it could also drag her name deeper into scandal. She met Chike's eyes. If we do this, there's no going back. I already jumped across scaffolding for you, madam, he said with a shrug. Might as well see it through. Her lips curved into the smallest smile. But deep down, she knew the real danger wasn't just Tayo anymore. The real danger was that Chike, the man she barely knew, was starting to matter in ways she hadn't expected. Thursday came heavy with the scent of rain. The boardroom of Chukwuma Holdings was a cold glass-walled space overlooking the city, a view meant to intimidate. Adana stood at the far end of the table, her hair pulled back into a sharp bun, a navy suit replacing the silk robe that had haunted the internet for weeks. Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she walked to her seat, a stack of neatly organized folders in her hand. Across from her sat Uncle Tayo, in his tailored agbada, gold wristwatch gleaming, smiling like the vote was already in his pocket. Around the table, board members murmured, their eyes darting between the two of them. The chairman cleared his throat. We are here to discuss the restructuring proposal. The primary motion is to appoint Mr. Tayo as interim head of the company until such a time. Before you proceed, Adana cut in, her voice calm but carrying, I have evidence that the man you're about to hand this company to has knowingly partnered with contractors engaging in fraudulent and dangerous practices. A ripple of unease passed through the room. Tayo's smile faltered. This is not the place for baseless accusations, my dear. Adana placed the first set of photographs on the table, sliding them toward the chairman. These were taken last week at Amati Towers, my building. Substandard materials, rusted rebar painted over to appear new, cement far past its manufacturing date. And the contractor responsible? A shell company you personally signed off on. She didn't stop there. From her folder came procurement invoices, cross-referenced with fake supplier names. This, she said, tapping a document, is the same company that built 3 of our most lucrative properties. If a single one of these structures fails, the lawsuits will destroy Chukwuma Holdings. Unless, of course, you walk away and let the blame fall on me, which I suspect is your plan. The room was silent except for the soft patter of rain against the windows. Tayo's voice was cold now. You think parading a few photos and papers will change anything? These men know where the money comes from. Maybe, Adana replied, but the press doesn't. And I've already scheduled a meeting with an investigative journalist. By tonight, every major outlet will have this story. If the board wants to be remembered as the men and women who handed the company to a criminal, vote for him. But if you want to protect what my father built, vote for me. It was a gamble. A public war meant she'd be under fire too, but for the first time she wasn't trying to hide. She was fighting. The chairman looked at the other members, their whispered conversations filling the air. Finally, he raised his hand. We vote now. When the tally was read, Adana had won by a single vote. She exhaled slowly, her eyes finding Chike in the hallway through the glass. He gave her a small nod, nothing grand, just a quiet acknowledgement. And in that moment, she realized she was no longer the woman who had stood on that balcony ready to let go. She was someone who had decided to hold on and to fight back. The rain had stopped by the time Adana stepped out of Chukwuma Holdings' glass doors. The late afternoon sun had broken through, bathing the wet streets of Victoria Island in a golden glow. She paused on the steps, inhaling deeply. The air smelled of wet earth and diesel, familiar and grounding. For the first time in months, her phone wasn't in her hand. She didn't want to know what the media was saying yet. The battle in the boardroom had left her drained, but under the exhaustion, there was a strange, steady calm. She had faced them. She had won. A familiar voice pulled her from her thoughts. You didn't just win, you burnt his entire playbook. She turned to see Chike leaning casually against a black Okada, helmet dangling from his hand. He wore the same jeans and faded shirt from their first meeting, but there was a lightness in his smile she hadn't seen before. I thought you said you don't come to this side of town, she said, descending the steps toward him. "I don't," he admitted, "but I figured today was worth making an exception." "Chike," she began, her voice quieter now, "I never really thanked you, not just for the balcony, but for everything after. If you hadn't brought me those photos—" He waved a hand dismissively. "You don't owe me thanks. You fought your own fight in there." She studied him, the way he spoke, without pride or pity. He had no interest in her world of titles and headlines, and yet he had stepped into it when she needed someone most. They walked together toward a quieter side street. She noticed how people glanced at them, some with curiosity, others with recognition, but she didn't shrink from it this time. "You know," she said, half smiling, "my father used to tell me that people come into your life for a reason. I used to think it was just something parents say when they want you to be polite to strangers. Now, I think he might have been right." Chike chuckled. "If your father saw you now standing up to those men, I think he'd say you've finally learned how to fight like him." Something in her chest loosened at those words. The shame, the self-doubt, the isolation, it was still there, but smaller now, like a shadow fading in the light. They reached the corner where the street opened to the lagoon. The water shimmered under the setting sun, waves lapping gently against the shore. "So what now?" Chike asked. Adana took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the question. "Now, I rebuild. Not just the company, me. And I'm not doing it from the top floor of a glass tower anymore. I'm going to start where the real work happens." He raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you're planning to get your hands dirty." She smiled. "Maybe I am." They stood there for a while, watching the water. For the first time in a long while, the horizon didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them could fully name yet, but both wanted to see through. Adana stood beside Chike, her heart lighter than it had been in months. There was no grand declaration or heroic resolution, just the quiet promise of a new beginning, as fragile and real as the waves brushing against the shore. For so long she had defined herself by the empire her father had built, by the weight of his name, by the pressure to live up to the perfect image that had been carefully constructed around her. But now, standing on the edge of the lagoon, Adana realized that her identity wasn't something given to her by others. It was something she would carve for herself, one step at a time. "I'm going to need a lot more than just courage to make this work," she said quietly, not expecting him to answer. Chike, standing a few steps away, looked out over the water. "You've already started," he said simply. Her lips curved slightly. "I guess I have." She reached into her bag for her phone, hesitated, and then turned it off. She didn't need to see the headlines or the messages waiting to distort her victory. The world could wait. "I'll need to rebuild the brand, talk to the right people, make sure Tayo doesn't get his hands on any more deals." Her voice was steady now, the old cracks in it gone. "And what about you?" Chike asked, his voice softer this time. "What are you going to do for you?" Adana paused. That was the question, wasn't it? The answer she hadn't been ready for until now. She was more than the girl who'd nearly thrown herself off a balcony, more than the product of her father's business. She was someone who could change the course of her own life. "I think," she said, looking at Chike for the first time with certainty, "I need to start living for myself. And if that means taking risks, trusting the right people, and maybe even making mistakes along the way, then so be it." The light from the setting sun caught in his eyes, but he said nothing. Instead, he took a step toward her. "I'll be here," he said simply, "whatever you need." Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, everything around them seemed to fall away. "I know," she said, the weight of his words settling deep in her chest. "I know." And so together they watched the last of the daylight fade over Lagos, the promise of tomorrow shimmering quietly on the horizon. The battle with her past was far from over, but now Adana knew she wasn't alone. The city hummed with life all around them, but it felt quieter now, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. And for the first time in a long while, Adana smiled. Not because the road ahead was clear, but because it was hers to walk.